also to be here at the aquarium. It is magnificent, the view from all quarters. And I just want to say thank you to the people here for opening up their home. Another reason why Boston is such a gem, to have the aquarium here in our city. I want to extend, again, the good friends that we have here at the aquarium for providing not only the venue, but also just all of the other duties that are required to make this a very successful event. Thank you, thank you. Vicki Spurl, who you all know, unable to be with us today. She came down with a little under the weather condition, so she's unable to be here. But I know that she is ably represented by Rick Mesul, who will introduce our keynote speaker very, 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 very shortly. Just to let you know, we have a couple other events coming up, New England Council. We don't stop. We are the Energizer Bunny. We do not slow down. Tomorrow will be in New Hampshire, Politics and Eggs breakfast with the former United States Ambassador to the UN and the 2024 GOP presidential candidate, Nikki Haley. Over the next few weeks, we have Capitol Hill breakfast events planned. Congressman John Larson in Hartford, Congressman Jared Golden in Portland, and Senator Maggie Hassan in Manchester. And in Washington, D.C., we look forward to a very special program with several leaders of the new Democratic coalition on June 8th, and the chair happens to be Congresswoman Andy Kuster of New Hampshire. And as always, you can find more information and register for all our upcoming events on our website, newenglandcouncil.com. Today, we are here to talk about one of the most pressing challenges facing our region, our nation, and indeed, the entire world, and that is the climate change. As you will see from today's speakers, this is an issue that is having an impact across all sectors of our economy, but perhaps more importantly, it's an issue that each and every sector of the region's economy is taking action and working collaboratively to address. Before we turn to our panel of regional experts, we'll first hear from one of Capitol Hill's most outspoken voices for taking action to combat climate change, our own dear Senator Ed Markey. I thank him again for not only being here today, but always advocating on behalf of the New England Council and also advocating on our region to make it a vibrant area, and we can't say enough thank yous to him. But for a formal introduction, I'm going to ask Rick Mesul to introduce our very special guest.
Thank you, Jim, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to the New England Aquarium. It is so great to see you on this beautiful spring New England morning here on Boston Harbor, and to have one of our greatest friends in the fight to protect our ocean here with us. It is inspiring to see so many leaders from across many sectors of our New England economy gather because of two shared goals: to better understand the impact climate change has on our region, and to find ways to collaborate on innovative solutions. Before introducing our esteemed guest speaker, I want to quickly share why this topic is central to the aquarium's mission as a 54-year-old ocean conservation organization. The New England Aquarium's vision is to ensure a vital and vibrant ocean for future generations. We safeguard endangered and threatened species and their habitats. We inspire people to act. And critically, we ensure that the use of the ocean is balanced to help facilitate the responsible growth of our blue economy while conserving endangered species and their ecosystems. The use of our ocean has brought countless economic benefits to our Commonwealth and to the New England region, and is projected to grow even further thanks to increased investments in offshore wind, innovations in aquaculture, the growing blue tech sector, and more. The aquarium promotes the responsible growth of our blue economy from our work with state and federal policymakers on critical pieces of legislation to our Balanced Blue Lab, and you'll hear our new leader of our Balanced Blue Lab in our panel discussion today. The biggest threat to our work and the critical work each of you lead in your industries is climate change. From intensifying storms and rising sea levels to heat islands and increasing ocean acidification, climate change is already here at New England's doorstep. And we have the opportunity and the responsibility to work collaboratively and find ways to decrease emissions, advance sustainability goals, and protect local ecosystems, communities, and economies from this threat. Thankfully, here in Massachusetts, we have the privilege of being represented by one of the leading climate champions in Congress who fights every day to secure a resilient and livable future for all. For the past 50 years, Senator Ed Markey has represented Bay Staters first in the Massachusetts House of Representatives and then onto the United States House of Representatives. And for the past 10 years, he has served as our United States Senator, championing consumer protection initiatives, civil rights, immigration reform, and more. But amongst his long list of accomplishments, his leadership on energy, climate change, and the environment goes unmatched. Throughout his time in office, Senator Markey has tirelessly worked to protect the environment and grow the clean energy sector. Among his list of accomplishments is the recently reintroduced Green New Deal resolution, which charts a vision forward to provide jobs and counteract systemic injustices, all while addressing the issue of climate change. He also played a critical role in the passage of the historic Inflation Reduction Act, securing provisions that help invest in clean energy technologies and infrastructure, improve access to public transit, and get toxic substances out of our schools. He is a true ocean champion, fighting to protect areas off the coast of New England and fund our national park system. We've also had the immense pleasure of working with the senator and his team on the Sea Turtle Rescue Assistance Act, a bill he introduced with Congressman Bill Keating to help support the rescue and rehabilitation of critically endangered sea turtles, like the ones we treat at our Sea Turtle Hospital in the Quincy Shipyard. I could continue, but I know we're all looking forward to hearing from the senator himself. And so on behalf of all of us at the New England Aquarium and the New England Council, it is my pleasure to introduce our United States Senator and a friend of the ocean, Senator Ed Markey.
Thank you, Rick, so much. Thank you for all the work that you do here on an ongoing daily basis. And to Vicki, obviously, I love the entire team here at the aquarium. It represents, in a lot of ways, the whole history of the state of Massachusetts, who we are, and our relationship to the ocean. And I can't thank you enough for hosting me here again. And I will say, as well, that the work you do on sea turtles is absolutely critical. I came here last year, and I did a selfie video with Myrtle the turtle, which is still one of the highest viewed videos I've ever done, showing how popular Myrtle the turtle is with children of all ages all across this region. And as Rick said, this year I'm introducing the legislation, in one way or another I'm going to get it passed in order to preserve and save all of the sea turtles along the Atlantic and Pacific coastline who are endangered by climate change. And Jim Brett, thank you so much. Jim's got a very busy schedule. He's got to have a breakfast for every single person running for President of the United States. And that's a lot of breakfast. I am, I think, the only United States Senator to never run for president. So it's just the sheer numerical challenge that Jim has in having a breakfast for each and every one of those candidates it's challenging, but Jim is up to that challenge because in a lot of ways, as we know, when we all think about it in our lives, Jim just very well may be the organizing principle of our lives, okay? The breakfasts, the lunches, the dinners that Jim invites us to. So we thank you, Jim. We thank you for all of the work which you do to keep Greater Boston, to keep Massachusetts, to keep New England as a community, to have us thinking and organizing in a way that has our voice magnified much greater than it would be otherwise. So thank you so much, Jim, for all of your great work. And I'm so glad that I'm able to come here today in order to talk about the impact which climate change is having on the New England economy. In many, many ways, we're right here at the scene of the crime. This is it, right here. The Boston Harbor, also known as the Gulf of Maine, is the second fastest warming body of water on the planet after the Arctic. The second fastest warming body of water on the planet. And the impact that that has on the magnitude of the storms, on the impact on the cod, on the lobster industry, etc., is massive and is going to continue to grow as each and every year goes by. So in many, many ways, because of our proximity to the Gulf Stream, to Greenland, to this larger ecosystem, which ultimately then comes back to affect us here in Greater Boston, there is no more important subject for us to be talking about than the issue of climate change and the impact on the New England economy. And the aquarium is a regional leader in ocean and climate conservation research and education, studying our changing world and how we can help to protect it. It is the home of the first experience that many kids have with the wonder of our natural world, and it's the home of experienced experts who will help us to save it. Like so many, my first memory of really and being out on the ocean, we didn't have a sailboat in the Markey family. We didn't have a canoe. But what we did have is enough money to come in here and to park and then to go over to Rose Wharf and to take the ride down to Nantasket Beach, down to Paragon Park, and to ride out into the Atlantic Ocean and have this incredible experience that has been enjoyed by so many who live in our region and so many around the world who come to visit us. And that memory is imprinted on my brain as one of the magical moments of my youth. Being on the ocean, of course, did not trump being in Paragon Park, but it was a close second as an 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12-year-old boy. And while not every community is equally impacted, climate change does threaten all of us, no matter where you live or what you do. But the silver lining is that unfortunate fact is that climate action will help all of us too, and it will take all of us to build a livable, more equitable future for everyone. The fight against climate change is the challenge of our time. Tackling the crisis will require collaboration and interdisciplinary solutions. Luckily, in New England, we know how to work together across state lines and across sector lines. Massachusetts is the home of ingenuity and innovation, and it will inspire climate action. That could not be more evident than with today's panel, which features brilliant minds from the healthcare, education, technology, and transportation sectors, as well as visionary economic and environmental leaders that will spur further climate action. And we need climate action. Our lives depend on it because the damage is going to be increasingly massive unless we put the preventative care in place. The planet is running a fever. There are no emergency rooms for planets, so we have to put that preventative care in place. In the past 9 years, they've been the warmest years on record for our planet. 90% of American counties were hit by climate disasters. between 2011 and 2021, disasters that cost at least $1.2 trillion in damage, and they also took thousands of lives. 2022 was no different. Devastating storms flooded Missouri and Kentucky. 83 tornadoes tore across the South. Hurricane Ian killed more than 125 people and caused tens of billions of dollars in damage. Hurricane Fiona left all of Puerto Rico without power because the losses and the damages we face are not just dollar signs. They are human life, and no one is immune to this global scourge. Families across the country right now, driven from their homes, mourning loved ones, worried about the future, not sure that they can pay the bills. Families who are hoping and praying that we will do the right thing and work together for climate solutions. Because if we fail to act now, every year will bring more death, more debt, and more destruction. And we cannot afford to continue to pay in lives and livelihoods. A report from one of the world's largest insurance providers found that the effects of climate change could cause as much as $23 trillion in losses if we do not act to combat the climate crisis. Trillions of dollars on the line if we don't stop the damage and chaos of the climate crisis. Trillions of dollars that, if we instead choose to act, could be put towards climate resilience and disaster remediation to help communities to survive. Trillions of dollars that could be used to address this crisis for years to come. That is why we need to deliver on the Inflation Reduction Act. We need to ensure that the historic investments in this legislation get from the spreadsheets to the streets of our country. According to analysts, a total investment catalyzed by the Inflation Reduction Act is not $369 billion. That was the number that was attached to the Inflation Reduction Act, or the largest climate bill in history, that President Biden signed in August of 2022. $369 billion. However, Credit Suisse and again, in the last 2 months, Goldman Sachs has said that the number is most likely not $369 billion, but it's closer to $800 billion, or in the words of Goldman Sachs, $1.2 trillion that will actually come out of the tax expenditures from that bill and other sources that were built into that legislation. In other words, the appetite for wind and solar and all-electric vehicles and battery storage technologies and any technology that can reduce greenhouse gases is massively larger than all of the experts who were analyzing the Inflation Reduction Act and its impact on our economy. In other words, the Green New Deal young people in our country were right, and the experts were wrong. This appetite is huge for a transformative economic revolution, a new industrial revolution in our country that is going to make our air cleaner, our oceans more resilient, our economy stronger and more sustainable, with good jobs and a livable future. But turning this vision into a reality will require effective and intentional implementation and collaboration across all sectors. Advocates and communities across the country are working to make sure that our climate investments are implemented with equity and with transparency, bringing opportunity for all instead of sacrifice for some. We need sustainable, innovative solutions deployed at every level of our society. And we're going to need more action in Congress, in universities, in our research institutions, and in our financial sector. We must strengthen our transportation and healthcare systems and invest in green and resilient infrastructure so people have uninterrupted access to care before, during, and after a climate-fueled disaster. And that's why I have fought for and I continue to fight for bold climate and environmental justice investments in Congress, which will deliver real-world benefits. So, just 4 years and 3 months ago, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and I introduced the Green New Deal. And it was a vision for what should be unleashed in our country to solve this existential threat. Now, at the time, it was bitterly criticized by many as being unrealistic. However, what I realized, having been the author of the Waxman-Markey bill in 2009 with Congressman Henry Waxman, yes, we got it through the House of Representatives, but it died in the Senate. Yale University did a study and said it was the largest amount of money ever spent to kill any bill in the history of the United States House and Senate. The largest amount of money. So I knew it wasn't going to be easy, and I knew, in partnering with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, that what we had to do was to create a movement that would then create the momentum that then would create a moment, and that moment would be when Joe Biden put his signature on the Inflation Reduction Act, something that now will unleash $1.7 trillion worth of private sector and public sector investment in our country. But we're not done, because there is so much more that has to happen. Now, in that legislation, I was successful in helping to construct a climate bank. And that climate bank has $27 billion total included in it for projects, for example, like that which the city of Boston could apply to upgrade the entire housing stock to gold or platinum level energy efficiency. We have $7 billion of that. $7 billion of that 27 billion is for solar in communities, so that they can have access to the funding they're going to need, smaller communities, for the deployment of solar energy. McKinsey, in analyzing just my climate bank language in this bill, says that for every dollar that comes out of the bank, it will unleash $7 in private sector investment, meaning that it's about $150 billion ultimately of investment that is going to be made because of that bank. But we also realized something else, that historically there had been absolutely unconscionably little attention that had been paid to communities of color, to poor communities in our nation, in terms of the impact which environmental injustice had had upon those communities. And so what we were able to do was to build in $60 billion to remediate this historic injustice to Chelsea, to Lawrence, to Brockton, to Roxbury, so that those funds would be disproportionately available and accessible to those communities to deal with those issues. That was a big part of what the Green New Deal was all about. Finally putting communities of color, disadvantaged communities, on the map for the remediation, for the attention which they needed. And with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, with Ro Khanna, with other members of the Green New Deal Coalition, we are introducing new legislation to deal with specifically the transportation sector, cities, health care, transportation, in order to ensure that there is a focus on each and every one of those radical, bottom-up, visionary community leaders who want to reimagine a livable, climate-safe future driven by innovation. And in the face of crisis, we must create that optimism. So the task which is before us is more urgent than ever. It will require more ambition, more wide-ranging action, and this intersectional conversation today will help us to break down the barriers, to bring home the bacon, to put climate solutions into practice. So This is the gang of experts that the whole rest of the country and the world will be looking to for solutions. So just to put a point on it, it doesn't get enough attention, but over in Somerville, there's a place called Greentown. And over in Greentown right now, there are 200 startup clean energy firms that almost in their entirety all qualify for tax breaks under the Inflation Reduction Act. Will qualify to take their ideas, their innovation, and get them out into the marketplace. In fact, one company, Form Energy, has announced that they're going to construct a manufacturing plant with 750 jobs in West Virginia for the most modern battery technology that the world has ever seen. And that was the whole point of the IRA. It's to take the professors, the inventors, the innovators, and then to partner them with the manufacturing sectors of our country so that we can, in fact, create the 7 to 9 million jobs that experts say will be created out of this. And it's imperative for Massachusetts to capture this opportunity. So that's why I am so glad that you are all here today and that Jim has brought us all together once again. This is like biotech, like education, like healthcare. This is an incredible opportunity for New England to be the global leader, to have the ideas emanating from where we are right now. And I would just finish by saying it won't be easy, because whether it be offshore wind, whether it be any of these innovations, we're going to be seeing the fossil fuel industry bringing lawsuits, trying to slow down this revolution that they can now see is moving at an historically rapid pace. Even as we are looking at the debt ceiling negotiation, right at the heart of it is a goal by the fossil fuel industry to have permitting reform that allows for projects that will set off carbon bombs to be permitted on a rapid basis that cuts out local community environmental review. So that's why this week is so important from a climate perspective, because what we need and what you all know that we need is we need transmission reform. Not permitting reform, but transmission reform so that we can get quickly the renewable energy from the deserts, from the mountains, from the oceans, from the rooftops of Americans, and into the densely populated cities of our country. And the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission needs to be empowered to go and to get that job done, to unleash all of the innovation that is in this room. So I can't thank you enough for everything that you are doing. We are in the midst of an historic transformation, the largest economic transformation that will occur in the 21st century, moving from fossil fuels to a clean energy economy, not just for the United States, for the planet. We are not just the Bay State. We are the brain state. We are going to lead. We are going to be the key figures in this. Once again, thank you all so much for everything that you are doing. Thank you. Okay, good.
Lead our panel discussion. I'm pleased to introduce Peter Howe, Senior Vice President, Dental Line, a respected public relations agency here in Boston. I first got to know Peter when he was a reporter at the Boston Globe. He first covered the State House and City Hall, and later was a business reporter covering everything from technology to transportation to energy. And many of you may recognize him from his time as a business reporter on the New England Cable News and also host of CEO Corner. Today we are happy to count him as a New England Council member where he's been a very active member in several of our policy committees. This is not the first time we've called upon him to moderate a panel discussion, and we, needless to say, are pleased that he agreed to lend his time and skills again today. Peter, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jim. And I want to say again, I'm not sure if he's already hit the road, but thank you so much to Senator Markey for joining us this morning. Thank you to the council for arranging, and a big thank you to the New England Aquarium for hosting us. I'm sure all of you have had some version of this thought as you look around this incredible place and you listen to these happy children running around the aquarium. Don't you feel inspired to say, can we make sure this is still here for these kids when they are our age and for their kids and their grandchildren? It is such a beautiful setting and such an inspiration to the conversation that we are going to have. So I want to jump right into it. We've got a very interesting panel. You've got the bios, and instead of bogging us down by, I'll introduce people as I first called on each of them. Fortunately, they all have job titles that essentially explain what it is they do. So I don't need to read their bio, but the council helpfully provided those for you if you want to go a little deeper on what's going on. And just to frame this up a bit, you'll hear from all kinds of different sectors today about climate change and the impacts and what they are doing about it. And I would suggest that maybe a way of contextualizing all that you're about to hear in the next 30 or 40 minutes is to remember that all of us and the organizations that we are associated with are not just victims or future victims of the impacts of climate change, but we are more than we might like to admit contributors to it. And we are all part of the problem, but we are also all part of the solution, both in our organizations and in partnership with others. There's more that we can do than we may immediately imagine, and that's a big part of what we're going to talk about. And there's also incredible opportunity here. I think one of the, this is not an original thought to me, but I think one of the frustrations that I see with the way climate change and responding to it are framed up, or how often it's portrayed as doom, gloom, hair shirts, you terrible human beings need to be punished for what you've done to the planet, when in fact there is also an incredible opportunity to, in the world of energy, reinvest our energy money in our own economy, to live in ways that are cleaner and healthier and more in tune with the planet. So we've got a lot of interesting things to talk about, and looking forward to hearing from everybody. So I will start first with Dr. Paul Bittinger from Mass General Brigham, Director of Emergency Preparedness. Mass General Brigham, to kind of introduce you, Dr. Bittinger, you're in an interesting place where climate change is making us all, in many cases, sicker. So your business is going up. And you also have facilities like the Mass General right there next to the Charles River that you got to think about protecting against future impacts of climate change. And the industry is a bigger, as I said earlier, a bigger contributor to carbon emissions than you might think. So with that introduction, I wonder if you can kind of walk us through how Mass General Brigham is thinking about climate change and all that it means to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's such an honor to be with this incredible panel and to join you all this morning. Exactly as you said, I think there's an extraordinary recognition from the healthcare perspective about how climate change is making us all sicker. It worsens food, air, water quality. On events that are worsened by climate change, such as severe heat events, there's an extraordinary demand on the medical care system. We see increasing presentations of heart illness, of respiratory illness, of others. And the effects of climate change on human health are well documented. Much as we do love to deliver care, this is not the way we want to be delivering any additional care in any way. And it's really incumbent on us both to advocate for mitigation of climate change effects, but also to work very hard in our communities. Senator Markey mentioned the health inequity of climate change and the health effects. There are communities that are much more disproportionately affected, those without air conditioning on the hot days, elderly residents. And we are trying very hard to communicate with our patients to identify mitigation measures right now. I think the other thing that we're looking at for one of the direct economic and operational consequences of climate change is how vulnerable the healthcare sector is to climate change. And I don't think necessarily that's widely appreciated. We've seen increasing numbers of hospital evacuations, hospital failures following climate-related events. And I think after a hurricane, after a major storm, after wildfires, people expect that if, God forbid, they're injured, they can go to the hospital. And increasingly, we're seeing the hospital's not open. In fact, it's emptying out its own patients, competing for resources. We looked at our own healthcare facilities and found across 30 campuses a substantial number of vulnerabilities that we are addressing for flooding, for heat, for wind speed risks. And addressing those costs is not cheap. It'll cost us $300 million over many years. But compare that to what we saw in NYU Langone when they evacuated after Superstorm Sandy. That was $1.4 billion of economic cost just from one single event for one single facility. We can't afford not to act. And we have to be open for our communities. It's the expectation that we are there to care for you, and we want to follow through on that. I think the last thing you touched on is a really important one, which is we have to acknowledge in healthcare, we're a pretty big contributor to climate change with the energy we use. Anesthetic gases actually are a pretty unrecognized source of climate change. But in addition, we need to advocate together to reverse some of the trends we've seen recently, particularly a trend towards disposable products. Regulators are increasingly pushing us in healthcare towards using disposable products, and they have a very negative effect on the planet from what's called Scope 3, or the climate change greenhouse gas emissions that are outside of our direct or indirect control. And so we're trying to advocate strongly for a retooling of how we use healthcare products, for safer use of anesthetic gases, for sure, less use of them, but also with all of the different disposable products to move back towards reusables so that we're contributing less to the problem ourselves.
Great. Thank you. Next up is anybody who's been in the hospital and seen how many things get thrown out. I think that's worth clapping for, reducing that. Emily Lockhart is the Associate Vice President of Ocean Sustainability, Technology, and Innovation here at the New England Aquarium. Thank you for hosting us today in this beautiful place. And obviously, so many of us know the New England Aquarium is a wonderful place to visit with families and learn about the ocean and the animals in it. And the aquarium also is deeply engaged in research, advocacy, and something called the Balance Blue Lab. And I wonder if I can ask you to introduce us more to that side of the aquarium and your mission.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And thanks everyone for being here. It's our pleasure to host this event. So the ocean perspective on climate change, absolutely. The aquarium hosts over 1 million people every year here, but we also have a research institute side of things where we have scientists, a couple dozen of them, who are really watching, closely monitoring the changes that are occurring in our ocean. And a few, basic statistics, but the ocean is responsible for absorbing 90% of the excess heat that has been caused by greenhouse gas emissions. It is responsible for absorbing 30% of the atmospheric carbon that is being caused by fossil fuels and deforestation. And it also, incidentally, produces 50% of the oxygen we breathe. It has been a resource here on our Earth that has honestly buffered us against the worst effects of climate change, but it's also suffering, and we're seeing that. Our scientists are seeing that. We're seeing ocean acidification. We're seeing the heat of the oceans that is changing the patterns of fish. We're seeing currents that are shifting, slowing down, and so we are on the vanguard here at the aquarium looking at this, but we also are thinking about solutions. I think something that is really exciting, and part of the reason I joined the aquarium recently, is that we see a lot of opportunity here. And the Balance Blue Lab, which is a newly created lab that is looking at the solution side of the climate and the ocean and the climate. So we do a couple of different things. First, we work with corporates, with industry, doing advising on sustainable practices, so thinking about how to responsibly use the ocean's resources. We have partnerships that go back a decade and a half as we work with folks who really are interested in figuring out how they can be responsible actors in the ocean. And more recently, I know Senator Markey brought up Greentown Labs. We've been working with startups, actually. So we have, over the past 3 years, graduated 20 different startups in the ocean tech space who subsequently have raised about $20 million of outside funding, who are all focused on ocean solutions. And, you know, as I often say, ocean tech is climate tech. The ocean and climate are just intrinsically linked. And so we see a lot of opportunity as we develop more solutions to fight climate change, to fight our climate crisis. And we see businesses as partners in that. I think that as we think about ways that we can all be more thoughtful and operate more sustainably, we can also be developing technology and innovation that is really going to move the needle. And so it's a sort of more hidden part of the aquarium, but something that I'm really excited to be working with hopefully fellow folks here on the stage and in the audience in the coming months to develop more climate innovations. So thank you.
Great. Thank you. Dennis Carlberg from Boston University is the university's, I want to make sure I get the title exactly right, Associate Vice President of Sustainability. And I want to make sure everybody can see over here. There's one bad sightline. Good. All kinds of amazing things going on around climate and sustainability at Boston University. The biggest emissions-free building in our city, as I understand it, and research and some very tactical efforts to buy energy in ways that put the worst power plants out of business. So I wonder if I can ask you to say more about those.
I'd love to. I also do want to talk about our main product, which is our students who graduate.
Yes, they are important.
And I think, you know, that's our future. That's what really gives me hope. We have an amazing class graduating every year. But to get to these points, we have a climate action plan, which was approved by our Board of Trustees in 2017. Out of that climate action plan, the first thing we did was to develop a large-scale wind farm to participate in that development. The wind farm is located in South Dakota. The reason we went to South Dakota was to leverage our investment to impact a greater displacement of fossil fuel generated power. So after looking at 127 projects in the 4 dirtiest grids in the country, we maximized our investment and we expect to have about 2 times greater impact on global greenhouse gas reductions than if we were to do a project in the Greening New England grid. That was a little hard for me to get my head around initially, but it's actually working. And the project came online in 2020, matching 100% of the university's electricity usage. So, and by the way, it is the largest single active power purchase agreement by any college or university in the EPA's Green Power Partnership, and gave us the Green Power Leadership Award from the EPA back in 2021. That helps the Center for Computing and Data Sciences, which most people know as the Jenga building. I'm not supposed to say that, but I did.
Your secret is safe.
That is the largest fossil fuel-free building in Boston. What's important about this is it's showing that we can do this on an urban scale. The project's 345,000 square feet, 19 stories, and has no gas line connected to it. It's powered by geothermal heat pumps and electric boilers and chillers for the last 10% of the energy. And so it's working with talented folks. Our design team was really quite amazing. And you know, bringing that expertise to the table, but having leadership from the top that says, we want a fossil fuel-free building. Can you do this for us? So I'm incredibly proud to be part of Boston University and doing this work and being able to be, as an architect, trying to push these kinds of things my entire career to finally have somebody yanking on the other end of the rope is pretty exciting. I do want to talk about our students and our research. We have researchers that work with the New England Aquarium. We have students that have worked here doing important climate research. We have important climate research. Sea Heat is a recent project which deals with the urban heat island effect in East Boston, and looking at the strategies for actually making an impact in reducing urban heat island effect. BU Urban is a collective of faculty around the urban environment and providing opportunities for PhD students to work with governmental, non-governmental, and private sector folks to leverage and really get experience out in the field, and they move on to do amazing things. And I still stay in touch with some of the students who leave BU, and it's great to hear what they're up to. One, I just want to give a shout out, even though Senator Markey's no longer here. One of our students went on to work for Senator Markey for several years. Now she's the director of offshore wind for the National Association for Clean Energy. I think I don't quite have that one right, but you know, really impactful work. These students really care about this work, and they come to us, and we provide opportunities. We have a campus climate lab. I'm going to ramble for a little bit, sorry. We have a campus climate lab which funds students for working on our climate action plan, projects that they design with faculty to make a bigger impact on Boston University's campus and beyond. And yeah, I'll leave it at that, but I could keep going for a couple hours, so thank you.
That's great. I think a theme that you'll find this morning is these elevator pitches are so fascinating. I want to learn so much more, and that is a feature, not a bug, of the way the council has set up the program. I want to turn next to Catherine Houtinen from Analog Devices. She is a principal program manager with the Ocean and Climate Innovation Accelerator. I want to say just briefly, Analog Devices, we all know, or many of us know, have an idea of they make chips, they make things that enable technology. They are committed to becoming carbon neutral by 2030 and zero emissions by 2050, or net zero emissions by 2050. And Catherine's part of this is helping with ways that Analog Devices is making technology that enable things like electric vehicles, offshore wind, other transformational energy technologies, and a lot of this work is being done with the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute, another New England Council member. So with that, would love to ask you to say more about Analog's role in the energy transition and helping us deal with climate.
Thank you. So for those of you who aren't as familiar with Analog Devices, we're a $12 billion global semiconductor manufacturer. We're based here in Massachusetts, up in Wilmington. We have 26,000 employees around the world, of which 2,500 are here in Massachusetts. And as was already described, we're pretty much everywhere in any electronics that you may encounter, both on the consumer or industrial side. So we're in most likely your cell phone, we're in your electric car, we're in your house, in your TV set. We're also industrial automation, we're in the Mars rover, we're in the James Webb Telescope, and we're now beneath the ocean. So we've been very focused on energy transition, kind of enabling that electrification of the grid, of vehicles. It's been a big focus of ours. And a few years ago, it was a realization by our CEO as he had a conversation with Jacques Cousteau's granddaughter about the role of the ocean and the climate, as was already described here, so I'm not going to repeat it. And we realized that our expertise in making low-cost, energy-efficient electronics was really key to enabling research and data gathering in the ocean. So back in 2021, Analog Devices partnered with Woods Hole Oceanographic to launch a consortium called the Ocean and Climate Innovation Accelerator, or OCIA. And the mission of this organization is to bring together organizations to form a consortium to help fund and design and enable low-cost, scalable, and deployable technology and solutions for the ocean. So right now, the ocean is woefully underfunded compared to other organizations that are government funded. And so that means that the technology that's being used hasn't had that extensive investment that you would get above the ocean or in space. So it's hard to create really low-cost innovations that can go out there and collect that data at the deep sea level or at the sea level, to collect that data to inform the policy that is so key to decide what innovations, what changes make sense. So for example, there's a lot of technology that people are doing now, like iron fertilization in the ocean to capture carbon. Other interventions people are taking, but understanding what the net impact of that is difficult. So we're trying to use science to inform the technology to get the data needed to make sure the decisions that are being made are appropriate.
That's great. We're looking forward to hearing more about that as we dig in more deeply. Next up is Rocky Kumar, who's Senior Vice President for Sustainability Solutions with Liberty Mutual. You may have heard the little song that goes, Liberty, Liberty, Liberty. And we heard Senator Markey talk about this, the idea of a $23 trillion potential hit, sort of the mother of all property and casualty insurance claims from climate change, like the entire year worth of economic output from the United States goes away. So introduce us to what Liberty is doing around thinking, how do you wrap your arms around this crisis as a major property and casualty insurer and help lead us in the direction of solutions?
Yeah, thank you so much. It's great to be here. So Liberty Mutual is actually servicing the entire economy, individuals as well as companies. With that kind of thinking, I mean, if I wish I could go back in time, the one thing I would caution us against thinking about the transition is calling it an energy transition, because it really is a socio-economic transition of our generation, as Senator Markey did mention. But to put that in context, the last time we did something similar was moving from whale oil to electrification. And that took a long time. But that also created a different type of economy and different opportunities. And I think at Liberty, we're doing both, understanding the risk, but that's what we do. We help identify risk, mitigate, and then transfer that risk. But understanding this risk also helps us help de-risk and support the transition by supporting newer technologies from being adopted, because there is a lot of risk in these new technologies. I talked about the scale of transition that is needed, and the last time we tried to do that was about a century that it took, like probably 100 years or more. We're trying to do this in a very short time, so policy is very important. And by policy, it's not just any policy. I think 3 of us here talked about policy, right? Catherine, Paul, and I talked about policy here. And it's coordinated policy, because we are looking at an interconnected world and sectors are interconnected. So I think there's a lot of work that we're doing to inform policy. I also think we need integrated systems thinking. And I love to give this example in terms of how we try to get our folks to think at Liberty. If you are trying to prevent, or build resiliency against hurricane risk, for an individual house, you'll say build it on stilts. To save a community, you'll say let's build a seawall. But if you want to save the planet, you want that seawall to be a reef or a marsh, right? And that's where we need to get to, but we're not there yet. And so that's an example I like to give as to how we need to think. I want to also talk, we also understand resiliency, because you did mention the one thing we know for sure. We don't know how we're going to get to net zero. We don't know which technologies are going to win, but we definitely know that it's going to get worse. Physical impacts of climate change are going to get worse. And for our sector and for every human being and community here, resiliency is key. So we found that, there's research out there that shows for every $1 you spend on increasing resiliency, you save $11 in rebuilding costs. So that can really impact from an economic perspective, but also save lives. And so one of the other things we do is advocate for resiliency, because I think our conversation on transition focuses so much on mitigating emissions. It does not focus enough on how we are going to combat what we know is actually going to happen. So I think I'll stop there.
Right. No, that 11-for-1 figure is very compelling and makes all the sense in the world if you think about it. We have batting cleanup, the CEO of Massport, Lisa Wieland. And as we sit here, Lisa can see some of the agency's prime properties. We know Massport is doing a lot around mitigating the carbon footprint of Logan International Airport to your right and the Conley Container Terminal to your sort of farther right. What I think people may not know so much about is all that Massport is trying to do to be a player in reducing the carbon footprint of the airplanes and the ships that use your facilities. So introduce us to that part of Massport's mission.
Sure. Thank you, Peter. So let me try to frame what we're trying to accomplish by saying most of you know that our mission is to connect people and goods to the global economy. But as we do that, we have to balance the economic, transportation, and climate goals of the Commonwealth. And so that is an enormous task. And coming out of the pandemic, we asked ourselves, how can we set a very ambitious goal to reach net zero? We have a decades-long foundation of being a good environmental steward. And so we set this very ambitious goal to reach net zero by 2031. That happens to be Massport's 75th anniversary. And we are trying to get there for Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. Those are the emissions that are under our control. Simultaneously, we're going to be working with our business partners. Peter, as you mentioned, the shipping lines, the airlines, about how we get them to reduce their own emissions. But we thought we needed to get our own house in order first before we really push them to do what they need to do. And so for us, in terms of Scope 1 and Scope 2, it means certainly reducing our energy usage, making our facilities more efficient. It means utilizing and procuring clean energy. We already have solar sites across many of our properties. And it means decarbonizing our fleet. How we get there is still a big question. I think Rocky talked about, the right technology hasn't been landed on yet. And so we all need to think critically about this concept of, as we're all trying to move really fast, how do we maintain operational resilience? If we asked you to take one of our Logan Express services to the airport instead of driving, and we picked a technology that wasn't operationally resilient at this point, you'd probably be pretty disappointed in your customer experience if that bus broke down. So figuring out how we work with a bunch of companies who are trying a lot of different things and place smart bets to help us get there is key. And that's true when we think about how we partner with our airlines and shipping lines. One of the things that we've done is we are a founding member of a consortium with MIT. It includes not only us and MIT, but airlines, energy companies, aircraft manufacturers, to think about how do we bring sustainable aviation fuels to the Northeast. Right now, most of them are concentrated on the West Coast for a whole bunch of good reasons. So we need to partner to figure out what is the source stock for sustainable aviation fuels. What is the infrastructure that's required? It's a drop-in fuel, so for the most part, we'd be pretty much ready to go if we could figure out how to get it produced, what's the delivery mode, and then incenting airlines and others to use it. So that's an example of kind of the partnership that's needed to move the needle around sustainable aviation fuels. And then many of us are also involved in an effort to make the Northeast one of the 10 hydrogen hubs identified across the U.S.
One of the most interesting things that Senator Markey said this morning, among many interesting things, was in the face of crisis, we must create optimism. I'd love to kind of throw it open to the panel to react to that idea. In the face of crisis, we must create optimism. And I want to be sure not to sound like Pollyanna, to say, here are the ways that we should be more optimistic. Here are also some ways we need to be a lot more terrified and feel a much greater sense of urgency than we seem to be showing in 2023. So I wonder who might like to step up. Catherine.
So here at Analog Devices, we really believe that technology is an enabler of a greener future, and the move to electrification will be disruptive and transformative for the planet as a whole. So we're putting a lot of time in. There's a lot of new technologies coming on. The green hydrogen is going to be a game changer. Fusion might actually become a realization at some point. But there's so much activity going on and really disruptive technology, as well as I think there's a younger generation stepping up that are interested in help driving a new future for us. So as they look towards the educational models, the workforce development, the students, the young ones that are really looking to, we need to make a change now. And I think the technology is coming to a place to help enable them and us to make that change in a rapid manner.
Paul Bittinger, it looked like you perked up.
Well, I've always got a good terrifying story, but I'll try and accompany it with something encouraging as well. I think, when we looked at our systems across Mass General Brigham, we looked at heat stress as just one thing that we're modeling. We looked at two different time windows. 2030 was our near-term time window. 2070 is our long-term time window. So every building we build going forward will be resilient against climate change in 2070. Right now, if you look at the Metro Boston area, eastern Massachusetts, we have about 7 to 10 days or so greater than 90 degrees each summer. But by 2030, that could be up to 30 days. And by 2070, that's 90 days. That's almost the entire summer. And there's very few hospitals across the entire New England environment that are built to withstand that kind of heat stress. And across New England, many hospitals don't have their cooling on emergency generation, so that if there's a grid failure, the hospital can't keep cool and therefore has to evacuate. And if multiple hospitals are evacuating across New England, there's nowhere for them to go, there's nowhere built. So that's the terrifying, that's the urgency by which we need to really act on this now. But on the plus side, I would say never before have we had the energy, the action that we have in the healthcare sector. We have 4 different medical directors for sustainability actively working on this in our own system. We have cut our own greenhouse gas emissions by 58% since 2008, and we are on track to be net zero by 2050. We, in fact, have sped up our goals because we achieved some of our early targets earlier than we expected, and are trying to accelerate the pace of change for us. So the good news is when people are pointed in the right direction, when there's really buy-in, which I think for obviously all of us up here on the stage there is, you can accomplish a lot in a short period of time.
Dennis?
I have a great deal of hope. We have the technology today to make this work. At BU, I mentioned we have a climate action plan which set a goal to be carbon neutral by 2040. We've reduced our emissions by 64%. So we're well on the way, and the easy stuff is done. The challenging part, the scary part, maybe a little context. The Institute for Global Sustainability at Boston University worked on Carbon-Free Boston, the report that now Boston is working to decarbonize. BERDO is one of the outcomes of that, but this is Building Emissions Reduction and Disclosure Ordinance. And that puts a price on carbon. That puts an incentive for all of us to be moving in this direction. The challenge is that in Boston, about 70% of the emissions come from buildings. The city of Boston has set a goal to be carbon neutral by 2050. 85% of the buildings that exist today will be there. And 85% of the buildings in 2050 already exist today, which illustrates the importance of addressing existing buildings. And that's where the challenge lies, and I think BERDO has some solutions for that. And I think the Inflation Reduction Act is going to really have an impact on that as well.
Yeah,
Rocky.
I'm going to say that, what keeps me up at night is not new technology, it's the implementation, the way we're going to implement and get there. And that's where the risk lies, because there are 2 things that you keep in mind. One is, again, we're not doing system level thinking. I'd love to give you an example. We do a lot of work through philanthropy where we've funded climate groups, and I was having a breakfast with one of them, and one of them said, we're retrofitting solar panels in low-income housing in East Boston, and we managed to get it done, and we put a battery storage unit in the basement. And I was like, what happened to your risk there? Right? And they were like, oh yeah, the fire department said, no, you can't put it in the basement. That's a fire hazard, you need to put it outside. And Mass Audubon was on the same table, and they're like, wait, where did you put it outside? Because, we have the birds there and stuff. So that's an example of how we implement. We can do policy, but we need guidance, and we need to work together to solve these problems. And the second thing is human behavior. We can have the best technology if no one's willing to adopt it and change their own behavior. That's going to be a problem.
Emily?
Yeah, I just wanted to pipe in because I think, to the point that there's technology available now, I think you're absolutely right. I think that one of the things that I hope we're better at as a society than we've been in the past, though, is thinking about responsible use generally. I think that we've got, an opportunity to really turn things around here and get it implemented appropriately. But, sometimes we don't think it through as a society, all the unintended consequences. So you're talking about iron fertilization in the ocean, right? We really need to be also developing, monitoring, and making sure that we're approaching this in a way that we're conserving our natural resources, conserving the ocean and ocean life as we implement these solutions. One thing I was talking to a colleague about yesterday was just thinking about sort of lighting in New England, that we went from whale oil, right, to then petroleum, first in Pennsylvania, and then oil and gas, heating incandescent light bulbs, to now LEDs that might be powered by offshore wind. Keeping in mind, by the way, that every single source of that energy, from the whales to the oil and gas to the wind, involves the ocean. So definitely a plug for the ocean in all of that. But I think that we're getting great at better technology, but I really just think we need to be very careful about monitoring it for unintended consequences and being responsible about that. And that's part of what the aquarium's here for. It's exciting, there's a lot of opportunity, but I feel like we're now at a more mature point where we can be taking the whole picture into account.
I think I'll focus on optimism in a slightly different way. When we launched our net zero plan, obviously our staff had some heart palpitations about what I was committing the organization to. But I'm optimistic because when I look around and I see how people are rolling up their sleeves and they're thinking differently about how we operate and they're willing to try new things, it's really created this enthusiasm and this motivation to all work together and be creative and figure out how we're going to partner to tackle these problems. And so as I'm sure many of you in the room have faced some of these workforce challenges over the past few years, we also have faced them. For us, this has been a catalyzing goal, right, where it helps bring people together. We all have this focus. We're all working together. And so I'm really optimistic about we'll get there because everyone's pulling together to make it happen.
Jim Brett is committed to an on-time council in the same way Lisa Whelan is committed to an on-time airport. So I just want to do one kind of final question. I'll defer to Jim on whether we can sneak in a question from the audience. Inflation Reduction Act, a lot of policy people here. Would love to hear if there's some interesting, or you think perhaps surprising to the audience, positive incentive that the Inflation Reduction Act has created for your organization to take advantage of, and or anything that you hope the Congress might change and improve in a future iteration of the IRA?
I'll just come back to one of the things that the IRA is going to enable us to do is apply for a grant to be able to do this planning work that I talked about when we're trying to bring sustainable aviation fuel to the Northeast. So the FAST SAF program is one that will help many of us figure this out. And so there are a number of components in the IRA that are going to enable us to make some investments with partners. So I think there are a number of things there, but that's one that we're clearly focused on in the near term.
Yeah, I will say that it's not just the Inflation Reduction Act, but also the Resiliency Act, Infrastructure Act that has helped which is very important for our sector. And I think building resiliency and investing in resiliency will try to keep insurance, will make insurance affordable and accessible.
And maybe to riff on that a little bit, I think the resiliency planning that can be happening, there's funding from the Inflation Reduction Act that's available. And this is a plug for Massachusetts, but also New England. We have zoning issues that are preventing us from implementing solutions that are on the table, that are possible, whether we're thinking about sort of, living seawalls, thinking about island barriers, things like that. And I would say what we need to do is work on the local level as well as on the federal level to get the zoning in place to actually let us implement those solutions. And that's really exciting, but this is New England, so this might also take a lot of time, and we don't have a lot of time at this point. So I think if there's a plug, it would be for really thinking about how we can zone for resiliency now.
I know at Analog Devices we're very excited about the CHIPS Act as far as bringing that additional funding in to bring semiconductor manufacturing much more local and New England based. I know a lot of things are being done now out in Taiwan, and how can we onshore a lot of things? Again, it's that resiliency. It's having a robust supply chain, that we have all the parts we needed to transition and to support this new green economy and everything we need for the solutions moving forward.
What do you think, Jim? Was that horn the, yeah.
First of all, I am optimistic also, listening to the esteemed panelists and knowing that they are all working in a collaborative way, innovative way together here in New England to tackle climate change. So I'm sure that many of you feel the same way that I do. I want to thank the panelists for taking time out of their busy schedule being here today. Again, the aquarium, kudos, thank you. And also a shout out to Sean Malone, who came up with the idea of putting this conference together, or this little gathering here this morning. Not easy to do, but he pulled it off flawlessly. So congratulations to Sean, and thank you. And that concludes the program. I promised 11:30, and I think we're a little late, but that's because